Aussie superstar Keith Urban has appeared on stage in America for the first time since.
Country music star Keith Urban stood on a stage in Pennsylvania. It was only 3 days after everyone heard about his divorce. Something was different. His wedding ring was gone. He was singing a sad breakup song. He changed one small word in the lyrics. It was tiny, but everyone noticed. The whole room felt it. People watching thought this marriage just suddenly fell apart. They thought it ended fast and loud. But that's not what really happened. The truth is, this marriage had been ending slowly for many, many years. Here's what most people don't know. There was no cheating, no big screaming fight, no one moment where everything broke. Instead, it ended slowly, so slowly that almost nobody could see it happening. This was a marriage where one person kept holding everything together. She kept doing it and doing it, until one day she just couldn't anymore. Soon after the court papers came out, Nicole Kidman had filed for divorce. After 19 years together, the papers used fancy words like irreconcilable differences. But there were no angry accusations, no TV interviews where they blamed each other. For someone who spent so many years protecting their marriage's image, the silence said everything. Here's what really matters. This wasn't a scandal. This was about roles. One partner became the person who fixed everything. The other became the emotional one. That worked for a while, until it didn't. Love didn't disappear. It just became too exhausting to keep going the same way. So what finally made Nicole stop? Was it one last argument? Or did she realize that being strong for everyone else meant she was slowly losing herself? If you remember when this marriage seemed perfect, did you think it would last forever? Before Nicole Kidman learned how to be a big movie star, she learned how to hide her feelings. She was born into a smart, strict family. Her dad was a brain scientist. Her mom was a nurse and teacher. In their house, success mattered. Feelings were kept inside, not shown off. Young Nicole, growing up in Australia, was super shy. Teachers saw how her face turned red when they called on her. She tried to make herself invisible. She wasn't loud or rebellious. She just watched and listened quietly. In her family, being safe meant being in control, doing things perfectly, never causing problems. This shaped how Nicole dealt with emotions. She felt things deeply, but she kept them private. When words didn't work for her, she found ballet, then acting. On stage, she could show feelings that real life said she had to hide. Acting didn't just give her confidence. It gave her rules. Emotions could have a beginning, middle, and end that she controlled. As her career took off, Hollywood loved her control. She could show big emotions without being messy. She was prepared, professional, and calm. That same control would shape her personal life too. In 1990, Nicole married Tom Cruise. Overnight, her world got bigger and smaller at the same time. Fame exploded. People watched everything she did. And inside that marriage, things got complicated. Tom's religion, Scientology, was a big part of his life. Nicole never talked much about it publicly. But after the marriage ended, people could see it had hurt her. When they divorced in 2001, Nicole didn't just lose a husband. She lost daily time with her adopted children, Isabella and Connor. Friends said she was devastated. She didn't just miss her husband. She missed being a mom every single day. The bedtime stories, being there, all the normal moments that make family feel real and permanent. That loss cut so deep, it never fully healed. From that moment on, stability wasn't just nice to have. It became something she needed to survive. Control wasn't about being bossy. It was about never letting anyone take her family away again. Friends said she became super protective of structure, of boundaries, of the life she was building. Acting became her refuge again, not to escape, but to master something. She chose roles that required discipline. She built a career that nobody else could mess up. But that kind of strength has a price. When control becomes safety, letting go feels scary. Trusting someone else feels dangerous. And love, no matter how real, starts coming with conditions. When Nicole entered her next big relationship, she wasn't just looking for love. She was looking for security, for a life that wouldn't fall apart if she stopped managing everything. What she didn't realize was that her fear, that fear of losing family again, would follow her into every relationship that came next. While Nicole was learning to build safety through control, Keith Urban was learning to survive by letting his emotions pour out everywhere. Their roads to fame looked similar, but what shaped them was completely opposite. Keith's childhood gave him music as an escape. He grabbed onto the guitar not as a hobby, but as a lifeline. Performing gave him a way to express feelings he didn't know how to keep inside. By his teenage years, he was already playing in clubs, chasing stages instead of going to school. Music wasn't just a dream, it was his way out. But being that open with emotions has a cost. Long before he became famous, alcohol and drugs came into his life. Not because he was bad, but because he was trying to feel better. Keith later said that addiction didn't start when he got famous. It was already following him quietly. The same sensitivity that made him a great musician also left him exposed and searching for relief. When he moved to Nashville in the early 1990s, things got really hard. The city didn't welcome him easily. Record labels said no. Deals fell through. Years went by with almost nothing to show. Friends said there were times he almost quit. He was talented, everyone knew that. But success stayed just out of reach. Rejection didn't make him tougher. It made him doubt himself more. His breakthrough finally came in the late 1990s. It brought everything he had chased, but it also made everything he feared bigger. Fame didn't steady him, it magnified everything. Touring made the highs higher and the lows lower. The applause filled him up, but the silence afterward cut just as deep. Addiction got worse. By the time his career finally stabilized, his inner life hadn't. Nicole's climb looked very different. Her rise was structured, intentional, almost like building a house brick by brick. After her first marriage collapsed, she rebuilt carefully, role by role, boundary by boundary. Her success wasn't just professional, it was psychological. She created a life that couldn't be shaken easily. Control became her power. If she could manage everything, she believed she could keep loss away. So when their paths finally met, they weren't opposites meeting. They were two people responding to pain in opposite ways. Nicole learned to contain. Keith learned to release. One survived by building walls. The other survived by tearing them down. By the early 2000s, both had reached big moments. Nicole was at the top of her career, admired for being calm and deep. Keith was gaining recognition as a powerful country music voice, but privately he was still fighting instability. From the outside, their success stories looked like they were lining up perfectly. Inside, neither had fully healed from their wounds. What drew them to each other wasn't just that they were different, it was recognition. Nicole saw someone who felt deeply, who didn't hide behind walls. Keith saw someone grounded, steady, capable of holding what he couldn't. Each seemed to offer what the other lacked: strength, vulnerability, order, expression. But there's a quiet danger in that kind of attraction. When compatibility is built on filling in each other's gaps, roles form quickly. One becomes the anchor, the other becomes the storm, and at first it feels like balance. It feels like healing. They met not as healed people but as functioning ones, carrying success, carrying damage, carrying patterns they hadn't named yet. Neither could see that the very things drawing them together were already setting expectations that neither could keep up forever. They were two people carrying different wounds, about to mistake compatibility for healing. By early 2005, when Nicole and Keith finally met, the story was already written for them. Two Australians, same age, both far from home, both survivors of public pain. It sounded like a movie before they even spoke. But the first meeting wasn't fireworks. It was polite, careful, almost boring. They met at a party celebrating successful Australians. Nicole had just won an Oscar. Keith was rising in country music. They exchanged numbers. He didn't call. Weeks passed. Nicole later said she wondered if he even liked her. For someone used to intensity, the weight felt like rejection. When he finally reached out, everything sped up. Conversations went late into the night. Not about work or fame, but about pressure, loss, and the cost of being watched. The connection didn't grow slowly. It exploded. By spring, they were inseparable. By the end of the year, the relationship was public. And just months later, they were planning a wedding. The speed mattered. They didn't pause to test normal life together. There was no slow learning about each other, no long uncertainty. What they felt was relief. For Nicole, Keith was warmth, emotional openness, a kind of freedom she hadn't let herself feel in years. For Keith, Nicole was stability, legitimacy, the promise of solid ground. Each stepped naturally into a role that felt familiar. She organized, he expressed. It worked because it had to. They married in June 2006 in Sydney, a ceremony that mixed intimacy with glamour, candlelight, tears, two wounded people appearing to find peace. To the public, it looked like redemption. To them, it felt like certainty. But certainty, that fast, often borrows from the future. Life after the wedding didn't slow down. It intensified. Nicole's filming took her across continents. Keith's touring stretched for months. They tried to make rules, never be apart too long, always prioritize family. But fame doesn't bend easily. Days were measured in flights, hotels, sound checks, and filming. Home became an idea, not a place. This is where the pressure quietly set in. Love existed, but it lived inside schedules. Conversations were rushed. Conflicts were postponed. Exhaustion became normal. When they did have time together, it was protected, curated, almost sacred. There wasn't space to ask difficult questions because survival required momentum. You keep moving so nothing catches up. And beneath it all, the roles locked in place. Nicole managed stability. Keith carried emotion. It wasn't discussed. It just happened. When something wobbled, she steadied it. When feelings overflowed, he gave them voice. At first, it felt complementary, even romantic. Each believed they were giving what the other needed most. But here's the thing they never stopped to ask. Were those roles temporary or permanent? Had support quietly turned into expectation? Was love being measured by endurance instead of understanding? Their relationship began with solutions before questions, with function before dialogue. In the glow of peak fame, there was no crisis forcing reflection. Everything appeared to work. From the outside, they were thriving. From the inside, they were building a system that required constant maintenance. The fairy tale, held because both were willing to perform their parts without complaint. But systems built on roles, eventually, demand more than either person can give. And when the pace finally slows, the questions that were postponed don't disappear. They wait. 4 months after the wedding photos left the magazines, reality arrived without warning. Keith Urban checked himself into rehab for alcohol abuse. The timing shocked everyone. Newly married, career rising. On paper, everything was finally stable. But addiction doesn't care about milestones. It responds to pressure. For Keith, the relapse was devastating. He later said he believed marriage would steady him, that love would quiet the chaos he'd carried for years. When it didn't, the shame cut deep. For Nicole, this moment triggered a fear she knew too well, the sudden sense that family could break apart without warning, that control could slip again. She chose to stay. Publicly, Nicole was unwavering. She visited him in treatment. She shielded the marriage from gossip. She refused to let this become another Hollywood tragedy. To the outside world, her loyalty looked heroic. Keith would later credit her with saving his life, and in many ways that was true. But something else happened quietly in that moment. Their roles hardened. Nicole became the stabilizer, the planner, the one who made sure life didn't collapse. Keith became the one being saved, the emotional center, the person whose struggles required accommodation. No one assigned these roles out loud. They emerged organically, shaped by fear, love, and urgency. And once set, they didn't easily change. In the years that followed, they built a life that worked. From the outside, it looked like triumph. Keith stayed sober. His career flourished. Nicole balanced major film roles with motherhood. They welcomed 2 daughters. Interviews were warm, red carpet appearances affectionate. They spoke openly about commitment, about choosing each other every day. But endurance has a cost. Behind the scenes, the effort never stopped. Their careers demanded constant separation. Tour buses and film sets replaced routine. Rules were created to minimize distance, but they were hard to keep. Nicole, shaped by losing daily contact with her children years earlier, clung tightly to structure. Stability wasn't optional. It was non-negotiable. Keith loved his family deeply, but the road pulled at him. Music remained both refuge and outlet. Emotions still needed somewhere to go. Over time, the dynamic that once felt supportive began to feel heavy. Nicole carried responsibility not just for herself, but for the emotional temperature of the whole household. Keith felt gratitude but also pressure. Being the one who was held together can slowly feel like being held in place. None of this exploded. There were no dramatic fights, no scandals, no betrayals, just fatigue. Friends later described a quiet weariness. Nicole increasingly tired of managing stability for everyone. Keith increasingly aware of being seen as fragile. What once felt like teamwork began to feel like maintenance. The marriage didn't break, it thinned. Years passed this way, nearly 2 decades of keeping the system running, of showing up, of reinforcing the story they had built together. To the public, they remained proof that love could survive addiction, distance, and fame. And in many ways, they believed it too. They had survived so much. Leaving felt unthinkable. But here is the hardest truth. Love wasn't the problem. Exhaustion was. Being strong for someone else, year after year without rest, eventually erodes something essential. Roles that begin as acts of care can quietly turn into expectations. And expectations, when left unspoken, become weight. By the time the marriage reached its later years, there was nothing left to dramatically collapse. Only the slow realization that continuing meant asking the same person to carry the same load indefinitely. That staying no longer meant saving the relationship, but losing oneself. There was no villain, no moment of betrayal to point to, just the end of what two people could reasonably give. And that made the decision harder, not easier. If this part of the story surprised you, what shocked you the most? If you step back far enough, the whole arc becomes painfully clear. Nicole Kidman didn't become controlling because she loved control. She became controlling because she once lost something she could never fully get back. And Keith Urban didn't become emotionally exposed because he wanted attention. He became exposed because music was the only place he ever learned to put his pain down safely. Childhood shaped the reflex, fame rewarded it, marriage froze it into place. Nicole's early life taught her that staying calm was protection. Her rise in Hollywood reinforced the lesson. Precision kept her safe. Structure kept her respected. And when her first marriage ended with the loss of daily motherhood, control stopped being a preference. It became a vow: never again. Never again would her family exist at the mercy of forces she couldn't manage. Keith's path taught him the opposite lesson. Expression kept him alive. Music turned chaos into language. Addiction wasn't about excess. It was about regulation. Fame didn't invent that need. It amplified it. And when he found success, the stage became both sanctuary and confession booth. He processed outward because he never learned how to process quietly. When they came together, those instincts fit almost too perfectly. Nicole brought order. Keith brought feeling. For a long time, it looked like balance. In interviews over the years, Keith often spoke about Nicole as his anchor, crediting her with helping him stay grounded and sober. Nicole, in turn, described their marriage as something that required constant work, care, and choice. These weren't empty words. They were accurate descriptions of a system under maintenance. But systems don't ask how you feel. They ask what you can still give. Over time, Keith began to feel managed, not intentionally controlled, but subtly contained. Schedules mattered, boundaries mattered, emotional volatility had consequences. What once felt like protection began to feel like supervision. Being the one who needed saving slowly became a fixed identity. Gratitude curdled into quiet resentment, not because Nicole was wrong, but because he wanted to be more than the fragile one. At the same time, Nicole began to feel herself disappearing, not dramatically, gradually. Her strength became assumed. Her steadiness became invisible. She was the one who anticipated problems, smoothed transitions, held space. Friends later suggested she grew tired of carrying emotional responsibility for everyone in the room. When you are always the stabilizer, you don't get to fall apart. This is where the marriage became a cage for both of them. Keith couldn't fully expand without threatening the stability Nicole had fought to preserve. Nicole couldn't relax without risking the chaos she feared most. They weren't arguing about love. They were negotiating safety versus freedom, and those needs rarely align cleanly. Publicly, they kept reinforcing the narrative. Red carpets, affectionate gestures, carefully chosen words. Privately, the gap between who they were allowed to be and who they were becoming widened. In later interviews, Nicole spoke about marriage requiring constant adjustment, language that sounded thoughtful but also revealing. Keith continued to express gratitude and devotion, even as his performances grew more raw, more confessional. Music remained Keith's outlet. Silence became Nicole's. And here's the truth most people miss. Love didn't vanish. It didn't rot or explode. It simply stopped functioning the way it once had. The roles that made the relationship possible in its early years became unsustainable over time. What began as care turned into obligation. What began as support turned into expectation. Eventually, Nicole faced a familiar calculation. Staying meant remaining the strongest person in the room indefinitely. Leaving meant choosing herself and risking the very loss she had spent her life trying to avoid. Keith faced his own reckoning. Wanting freedom didn't mean he didn't love her. It meant he could no longer live entirely inside the role that love had assigned him. Their marriage didn't fail because they stopped loving each other. It reached its limit because love alone couldn't correct a structure built on imbalance. When the function of a relationship no longer matches the needs of the people inside it, even the deepest affection can't hold it together forever. That's the quiet truth their story leaves behind. In the weeks after the divorce filing, there were no statements to read, no performances to decode. Just a few quiet photographs. Nicole Kidman walking through Nashville with her daughters. No entourage. No paparazzi swarming. Her hand holding theirs firmly but gently, as if reminding herself of what still mattered. There was nothing showy in the image. No attempt to signal strength or heartbreak, just movement forward, ordinary. The kind of moment that doesn't ask to be interpreted, it simply exists. For years, Nicole had been the one who studied the room, the one who saw cracks before they appeared, the one who held everything together quietly, consistently, without applause. Walking away didn't erase the love she had given. It marked the moment she stopped spending herself to keep a structure standing that no longer fit the people inside it. There were no accusations because none were needed. No explanations because the choice spoke for itself. Sometimes the bravest decision isn't dramatic. It's the refusal to continue playing a role that once kept you safe, but now keeps you small. Keith processed his loss through sound and stage lights. Nicole processed hers through silence and routine. Two languages for the same ending, neither more honest than the other. In the end, this story doesn't close with blame or victory. It closes with an image of someone choosing preservation over performance, and learning that letting go can be an act of care. Sometimes, the quietest courage is knowing when to stop saving everyone else and finally save yourself. If this story made you pause for a moment, a quiet like is enough.